You were smashing things.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. I know. It was tough though to get it down.
What?
It was tough to get it down because everything's like so important. Keep it in.
But you want people to read it.
Yes, exactly.
That's
Oh, no, please, yes.
As many as you want. Those are good to just hand out to people.
Yeah, but that editor, that letter took.
Oh, your letter was great.
More than a day. More than 2 days.
Of course it did.
Oh, yes. Let me
God help.
Nancy, and we get started so we don't run out of time.
Katie, besides Nancy, who's a really good editor, she's not here today. But she's very nice. And Doug's editor, she is. That's Katie. Wonderful. Great. Yeah, yes.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to our second to last Your Passion, Your Leadership Women's Workshop Series. And today we are going to have Nancy Glynn, who is the co-director of MomsRising New Hampshire, talk to us a little bit about managing great volunteers and bringing people into the movement. So born in Exeter and now rooted in North Sutton, Nancy is a dynamic community organizer, veteran, and storyteller with a deep commitment to grassroots leadership and public service. The daughter of a Korean mother and a proud mom herself, Nancy has built her life around service, connection, and empowerment. A U.S. Navy veteran and graduate of the UNH Institute on Disabilities New Hampshire Leadership Series class, she went on to serve as a community engagement coordinator and group leader, providing mentorship to family members and people with disabilities across the state. Nancy currently serves as a Selectwoman for the town of Sutton, the first woman to hold the position in over 20 years. She also serves on the Kearsarge School Board. And since 2021, she has chaired the Sutton Free Library Board of Trustees and is widely known as a, quote, serial volunteer across her region and by those who know her. It's awesome. As co-senior director with MomsRising, Nancy has led fellowship programs since 2018, first as a contractor and now as senior director, has mentored hundreds of granite staters in relational and values-based organizing. Known by some as a, quote, ninja warrior mom, and by many more as a steadfast friend, Nancy is driven by the belief that communities thrive when people are empowered to lead from where they are. So, the floor is yours, Nancy.
Thanks. So that was fun. I always love listening to someone read out my bio. It always makes me turn a little red in the face sometimes and go, wow, I did all that? But anyway, so welcome. I am so happy to be here to be able to talk about one of my biggest passions that I have in life, which is community organizing and being able to work together with members of my community to be able to make the positive change that we want to see happen. So can I go to the next slide? So obviously I'm going to do like a quick introduction of what got me here, as well as what MomsRising is and what we do. And then we have a few other different pieces to be able to help add some tools to your toolbox as you're thinking about wanting to organize in your community. Next slide. All right, I'm going to preface this. I did not actually write any of this, okay? So the reason why I did this was my team, my MomsRising New Hampshire team, we're a mighty team of 4. I had asked them if they would be willing to fill this part out for me. The reason why is because I have never met a single woman who is doing advocacy or is in places of power or in a lot of different spaces that has not experienced imposter syndrome and has asked themselves whether or not, should I even be doing this? Why am I here? And building my team and having folks around me to be able to lift me up, make me laugh with some of the things that they put in, and also, again, making me have that confidence to step into places like this is really important. And it's actually one of the things, too, that I think about when I think about community organizing and making sure that you have an array of people. Because when you fall down and you can't do the things, there are other people there that can help you along the way. And so you can come in and out whenever you need to, and also, again, lift each other up. So they wrote, coolest person ever, that's debatable, hot mom, Grassroots Governor Glynn. And that one's actually an interesting one because MomsRising New Hampshire, I mentioned we're a team of 4, but my partner in crime is Mackenzie Nicholson. She's a co-senior director with me. And we have a different model because we have a split co-directorship. And the reason why is because we recognize that the grassroots organizing is something that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of attention and focus that you need to be putting in there, and relationships take a long time to be able to build. So if you want to do that, then you need to have someone who is solely focusing on that piece, while the other one is memorizing all of those bill numbers and sitting under the Golden Dome and going into all the coalition spaces. I do some policy work. I do work on education policy as well as disability rights forward policy, and then I'll dabble in some of the healthcare work just because I had done some of that in previous roles. And then Mackenzie takes on childcare, maternal health, reproductive rights, as well as I know she attends some of the America Votes, so some of the voting rights things that we're doing too. And then she does the freedom to read, DEI forward legislation, all of the things. So she's the one who takes care of a lot of those pieces, and then I'm the one that brings our members in. So that's how we do it. Next slide, please. So I mentioned MomsRising, so we are a national organization. We have state chapters. New Hampshire is one. We also have Pennsylvania, West Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, Georgia. We just got a contractor in Arizona, and we also have Washington State. So it's really fun to be able to coordinate with some of our friends across the country to see what's going on there and get a little bit of insight there. But we are a national grassroots organization, and we do have over 1 million members across the US, and then we have thousands of members here in the Granite State. And we have had lots of historic wins. It's actually really something that we're really proud of because the last couple of years, we have been able to get a few wins, particularly in the maternal health space. Momnibus was an omnibus bill that focused on maternal health care, and that was one of the big ones that we had helped to push through with then Senator Whitley. And then we also had a Momnibus 2.0 that was a build on to Momnibus 1 to be able to increase, again, access to maternal health care in New Hampshire. And we've also had some movement in the childcare space as well, because we're starting to see after COVID, folks are recognizing that childcare is actually vital to be able to make sure that you can have people in the workforce. So we've been able to have some wins there as well. Next slide, please. All right, so what is community organizing? Community organizing, I feel like, as I mentioned, it's really important to have, but one of the reasons why is because when you're doing community organizing, you don't have to be the one doing all of the things. All right, that's a quick recipe to get yourself burnt out and not being able to move forward. Plus, there isn't a single person in the world that's an expert in everything. We have our strengths, all right, and it's important to lean into our strengths to be able to move forward. I like talking with folks. I mentioned that my partner, Mackenzie, she is more of a policy table. She's a little bit more of an introvert. And so, again, we split off and decide who's going to go where. The other reason why is because we did a strengths-based test to kind of see, it was a Clifton Strengths to see what are our number 1 strengths. She is harmony, and I am activator. So we're looking at 2 polar opposites of people. But because we're both bringing each one of those strengths into the picture, we're able to get more things across the finish line. Our other 2 folks that are in our that are on our team, one of them, her number 1 is an analyzer. She's the one who needs to find out the why. And then we have Alyssa, who's on our staff as well, and her number 1 is achiever. So we often make comments about how Nancy comes in with her crazy idea, all right? And then from there, we have Lauren, who's asking the why. Why are we doing this? How are we going to do this? What is this going to actually do? Is this reaching the goals that we're trying to do? Because that's just the way that she thinks. And then we have Mackenzie who comes in, who's Harmony, to help make sure that we don't all fall apart while we're trying to figure out how we're going to move through all of the things. And then we have an Achiever in Alyssa, where it helps to push us over the finish line. This is what I see a lot in not only our Moms Rising team, but also in a lot of the cohorts that we have with our members as well. You find that there are folks that just gravitate to one thing that they're really good at, and it's the mesh of people that ultimately get a lot of that work done. So, next slide, please. So I know that earlier in the series there was a series around power and identifying power. So I just wanted to do a quick thing when we're talking about community organizing, or talking about bringing folks together. We are talking about that people forward piece, but I also think that power is organized people, it's organized money, it's stories, and it's rules. So I think that those are the four that I tend to go around when we're thinking about what power is. And so when we're thinking about this scenario, we're talking about storytelling, so stories, and we're also talking about people and how those things can ultimately influence some of those rules. When you are chatting with folks and trying to bring people into your mix, identifying a self-interest is incredibly important, especially if there's one that you can find together. Because people are most likely moved by what they're interested in or by what directly affects them. That term, you don't know what you don't know, and if you don't know, you can't do better. That's really important to think about. And how do we do this? How do you find out someone's self-interest? Well, you build relationships with the folks that you're wanting to work with. And you kind of got to talk to people to start getting that moving. I often hear the term lone wolf, all right, which is really interesting to me because we know that wolves travel in packs. They're communal, much like humans are. And so when we're thinking about the lone wolf, going off and doing their own thing, they're not talking to their pack members. They're not a part of a pack. They're not going to be able to get the things accomplished the way that you might want to see. So, next slide. So the things that I wanted to go over were a couple of different skills, and one of them is the elevator pitch. Because one of the questions I have is, have you ever been in a situation where you met somebody and it was somebody that you really wanted to get to know, or you had something super articulate that you wanted to say to them, but then when you actually get that moment, all of it just disappears and you don't know how to be able to move forward? And then you kind of leave and you think to yourself, oh man, I should have said X, Y, or Z. I don't know if any of you all have felt that, but I know that I felt that on many occasions. So having an elevator pitch is really important to have when you're thinking about wanting to build your volunteer base and you're looking to want to increase your power in your community. An elevator pitch is a little bit different depending on who it is that you're going to be talking to. So you want to think about introducing yourself, providing a summary of what you do, explain what you want, and finish with a call to action. So, for example, my name is Nancy Glynn and I'm from North Sutton. I am a mom to an amazing Ninja Warrior child, and I have been noticing that you've been volunteering for a lot of things with the PTO at the school. I would love an opportunity to be able to sit down and have coffee with you. That covered in the introduction to myself, kind of gave them an idea of who I am and why I'm even involved in talking with them, explaining what I wanted, and then also asking them out for coffee. Depending on who it is that you're talking to, your elevator pitch might change a little bit. It could even be a, hello, my name is Nancy Glynn, and I am the co-senior director of MomsRising. I talk with moms and families all across the state on a regular basis, and maternal health care is something that is a particular interest to a lot of the moms that I work with. I would love to have a chance to chat with you about Momnibus 2.0. Would you like to get together for coffee, or can we arrange a phone call? Same thing there. Different, slightly different, but both have the same kind of premise behind it. Next. So when we're thinking about elevator pitches, some of the things to think about are being concise. Again, I mentioned tailoring your pitch based on who it is that you're talking to. Answer the who, what, where, when, why, and also practice. Realistically, this is a practice thing. All right. The reason why they call it an elevator pitch is because it's supposed to be able to be said in the amount of time it would take from you to get from one floor in an elevator to the next floor of the elevator. So you want to get it out as quickly as possible. And sometimes, especially when we're looking at advocacy or talking to elected officials, you really only have that elevator ride to be able to try to, I don't want to say trap them in a corner, but to get them in a space to where you can ask these things. So having an elevator pitch prepared prior to showing up is a great way to be able to do that. But also it's a great way too when you might not be someone who's comfortable talking to, you know, a member of your community. Maybe you're walking around, you're going for a walk, say around a lake or something like that, and there is a group of folks that you see on a regular basis, and you've wanted to get to know them, and you saw one of them wearing a button or a t-shirt that related to something that you cared about, that was an issue. So you kind of knew that this might be a safe person to be able to try to build that relationship and bring into your circle. So if you're shy, having an elevator pitch in play prior is not only good to be able to help with those nerves, but it makes sure that you get your point out across when you need to get it out. And I can't emphasize practice enough. I even say a lot of times to some of the members that I work with as well, practice with each other. Share what it is that you want to put out there so that you can just be better prepared when you get there. Next slide. So, one-to-ones. So we've gone in, we have our elevator pitch, all right? We've talked them into meeting us at the coffee shop. We're getting ready to be able to have a conversation. That's essentially what a one-to-one is. You're supposed to be there to discover what that person's self-interest is, so then you can kind of identify where they might fit in to the work that you're doing. You're going to hear this probably 4 or 5 times throughout this slideshow, which is one-to-ones are relational and not transactional. I'm going to emphasize that again because a lot of times when we're thinking about how we bring someone into the mix to be able to do some of the work that we want to do together, we're all human. We can see the truth. You can see if someone's being fake with you. You can see if somebody only wants one thing from you, all right? And that is something that, you know, can eventually turn somebody off from wanting to get involved at all. So you want to build a relationship. It also helps to identify those strengths. I mentioned a little bit about our MomsRising team and how our strengths play together. So being able to identify what their strengths are. Another strength to think about is how do they want to show up? Is it writing? Do they want to write a letter to the editor? Are they somebody that wants to speak at a podium? Are they someone that can watch the kids while, you know, mom is inside and testifying at a hearing? Is it somebody who can maybe even just show up with dinner one night because they know that family is going to be out? Carpooling. That's another one that I see a lot, is having someone that can't have transportation access readily available to them. So they have one of their friends or one of the other members take them. And on their way to wherever it is that they're going, a lot of times I hear about the mom that's getting ready to speak or testify or do any of those pieces. She's practicing in the car with her friend as she's on her way in. So, and the other big piece of this too, is it can't just be a one-time occurrence. One-to-ones happen often. And it doesn't have to be super, super structured. You know, sometimes it's just having a follow-up conversation with them. Ideally, you want your first one-to-one to be in person. But I also know that sometimes that's just not the case. It doesn't always work for folks. But knowing that you can meet in person, you can meet on the phone, you can meet via Zoom, but it's the constant one-to-one, the constant communications and conversations that help keep things going. And vulnerability matters, because when we're thinking about storytellers and we're thinking about self-interest, we talked about it has to do with things that affect that individual, something that they're interested in personally. A lot of times when we're thinking about the issues that we work on, there's a story there. And sometimes that story is not an easy story to necessarily be able to share with somebody that they don't know. So when I go in for a one-to-one, I think of it more of it's a conversation. There's listening on both sides, and there's also contribution to it as well. So for me, I actually started off as a volunteer for MomsRising. I was a storyteller myself, and that ultimately is what helped me figure out what works, or I see that works for me, is because I was that storyteller, I was that volunteer, and taking a little bit of all of the things that I've learned along the way and finding what works for us. So I wanted to make sure to express that the vulnerability piece is really important, because you have to share a little bit of your story to be able to hear a little bit of theirs, and that's okay. So I came into the mix because I have two boys. My first son, he's 14 as of yesterday, but he was 2 pounds 10 ounces when he was born, and he was a preemie. And that was probably the first eye-opener to advocacy that I've ever experienced, because you have to become an advocate for your child the moment that he came into this world. And I didn't have access to paid family medical leave. I was working as a waitress at the time. And he was 8 weeks early, and again, no paid leave. I was planning on working until the last possible moment, which technically that did happen because I did go into labor while I was working. I finished my shift, all right. However, it was definitely an eye-opener to me. My second son, Sawyer, he'd be turning 11 this year. Unfortunately, he passed away shortly after he was born. He was also early. And again, I didn't have access to paid leave. And at this point, he was very early, and my husband had gotten a hernia while he was working at a manufacturing facility. And he was going in for surgery 2 days after our son passed away. Because our son passed away, even though my husband had access to family medical leave, not paid, but just family medical leave, they said that he was no longer eligible for that because our son had passed away. And him and I were not married. So they said, it's no longer family medical leave, now it's bereavement, which means you go from having an opportunity to have up to 12 weeks that we have on the federal level to roughly about 3 days is what they give you. So that opened my eyes quite a bit. Again, I was waitressing. I didn't have access to paid leave either. I'm coming home from the hospital with empty arms. I had gone through a C-section and I was trying to manage all the things. Hunter, my 14-year-old now, he was 3. And we had our electricity shut off on us. We had to reach out to some local community groups to help us pay for heat and hot water and things like that in our apartment to be able to go forward. All right, that is probably the lowest that I've ever been in my life. And that ultimately, though, taught me what it is that matters that I'm going to be fighting for. So paid family medical leave obviously became one. You know, healthcare access became one for me, as well as looking at people and children and adults that experience disabilities and the families that are associated with them as well. All right, all of those pieces were all things that were self-interests of mine, but they all stemmed from a story that was actually kind of hard to be able to share with the entire world. But expressing the vulnerability opens it up for the other person to also do the same. And when you do that, you build trust and you build that relationship. And that helps to carry you along the way. So some of the considerations for your one-to-ones. The tone of your voice. I have been told on a few occasions that when I get really excited, I get really intense. And I talk a lot with my hands. And I can get louder when I get really excited about things. But the other thing to think about too is when you're approaching somebody in that way, there could be like a power struggle there, because they're gonna see, if you're coming at them with this demanding, intense voice, this is one of the first times that you're chatting with this person, they might feel like they need to submit, and that might make them run away. I mentioned the expressive vulnerability, and also this was one that really hit me hard, especially because I mentioned that I was a volunteer prior to working for MomsRising. I volunteered with other organizations in the state as well. And you have to be aware that sometimes past experiences with groups and organizations actually create trauma, because they were put in a situation where they shared a story too soon. They shared too much of that story that they didn't feel comfortable. I've seen some folks that had write-ups of their stories that were handed to them by an organization where they ended up saying something, targeting a legislator or targeting somebody else in their community. And it wasn't something that they wanted to do, but they didn't realize that their story was theirs and only theirs, and the organization they worked with didn't emphasize that. So being aware of past experiences of what that could look like, just put yourself in their shoes and wonder, when you're talking with somebody, how you would want to be approached, because we're all human at the end of the day. And I mentioned before that you're going to see this many, many times. Relational, not transactional. And again, folks can see the difference. Next slide. So some of the examples of the questions that you could ask, because I know that sometimes it can feel a little bit daunting to go and sit down with somebody that you might have an interest in wanting to get to know, because these are all deliberate. All of the times that you're going to want to meet with somebody, there's usually a reason why you want to meet with them. But then it kind of gets scary again when you're sitting in front of them and then you start to space, what are the things that I should be talking to them about? And so asking questions like, where did you grow up? That can help out tremendously, especially culturally. I think of my mom, who is from South Korea, and what her culture looks like and how she views things over here is different because of where she grew up. And also because she's an immigrant to our country as well, and to New Hampshire. So that was also something where she had to learn English when she got here. She might have cheated on her driver's test, and my dad was making like, C, can you see that? Because she didn't know how to do the written and the reading part of it was difficult for her. And so my mom knew all of the things, but she didn't know how to do the test. And so my dad was over on the other side going to her. But that's real life. That's an experience that she had. Your family, sometimes even your birth order can ultimately tell you a lot about that person. Are you the oldest? Are you the middle? Are you the youngest? And I know that there are a lot of families that I've spoken to when they have multiple children in their family. Each one of them is so incredibly different from one another, but you do see some characteristics that seem to be the same across the board in regards to birth order. And also, when you're thinking about organizing around a specific issue, why do they want to do it? Why this issue? Like, what is something that that might be able to open up for you there? Again, those benefits of one-to-ones, they are truly tremendous. And being able to identify barriers like transportation, access to technology, language access, all of those things also play a huge role too. And no matter what you do in these one-to-ones, you're always going to get something out of it. Next slide. So, bottom line, practice makes progress. This is another one of those things that, you're going to have bad one-to-ones, all right? You're going to have some rough interactions. But that doesn't mean you should step away. My favorite analogy that I give is when you're going into a parking lot and you're getting ready to park your car, and you see that car that's like parked sideways across 2, maybe even 3, if it's a huge truck, spaces, right? They pulled in, and you could see that it might not have actually been deliberate, so to speak. They might have just pulled in and ran inside the store. But fun fact, you can actually reverse and try again, and just take a few extra minutes to reverse and put yourself back into that parking spot the way that you need to. So when I think of one-to-ones, I often think about parking in a parking lot and knowing that just because you pulled into a spot and you weren't perfectly in that spot, it didn't go the way that you wanted it to, doesn't mean you can't come back to it and try again, because you absolutely can. Again, that vulnerability piece that I covered, and then meeting people where they're at. Not everyone processes things the same way. So I've even had one-to-ones with people where I asked a question and they struggled with being able to respond. And the next day, I get an email or a text message and said, I was really thinking about this question, and this is what I've come out with. Some folks take a minute to process. Some folks need a little bit more time. And ultimately having some of that patience for that, that's amazing, because having that patience to give them a chance to be able to share, you might get some of the best nuggets of information that you'll ever have, and even possibly create one of the best relationships that you've ever had because you've given them that grace. And a lot of people don't. Connection, not interrogation. So in previous one-to-one trainings that I've gone to, they used to give a percentage where they said it was like, I think it was like 70-30 was the percentage that they used to say, which meant 70% of the time the other person should be talking, and only 30% of the time should you say anything, and should pretty much be asking those clarifying questions. That doesn't work, all right? It worked maybe a long time ago, but not so much. You have to have that expression of vulnerability on both sides. You need to have that relational piece to it. So instead of a 70-30 model, I actually lean more towards 55-45 or even 60-40%. That way you are also giving a lot in that space too, and you're both walking away with a stronger relationship. Next slide. All right, so after the one-to-one, now what, right? So you've gone out and you've done your elevator pitch, they've come out and they've met with you, you've been able to identify ways that you might be able to work together. So what do? And this isn't just one person, because you're doing one-to-ones with all kinds of people, right? Because you're trying to gain all of those different strengths to be able to help your movement go forward. So once you start to build those relationships, introduce them to one another. It seems quite simple, but good people plus good people equals great people. And you'll find that when you meet somebody who inspires you and you introduce them to another person that's also inspiring, sometimes they come together and they go off and they end up doing some amazing things. That's one of my favorite parts about doing our fellowships in New Hampshire, is that I'll bring moms that have never met each other before, live on maybe different parts of the state. They might agree on some things, they might not agree on other things, but we're bringing them together and we're introducing them to each other. And they go through our fellowship program, they learn some of those advocacy skills, and next thing you know, I see them plotting going to a hearing together. I see them like working and editing LTEs for the other one. You know, it's always more fun when you can do things with a friend. And so whenever we go to the State House, same thing there, we always try to bring a group of us instead of just, you know, one person showing up alone, because it's always more fun that way. And if I know of any mom or any member of mine that is going to show up to the State House for a hearing and they don't have somebody that's going with them, I'll often just meet them there. Because just having somebody with you is so inspiring and so motivating, and it gives you that strength, just like that slide when I asked, who am I, to my partners to remind me, hey, you're you're a badass, you're great, you can do this, all right? You need that sometimes, and it's always more fun, like I said, when you go with a friend. I often think of Kent Street Coalition as well, because you see these groups of essentially community members, they're friends, and they show up together. It's almost guaranteed to see some of the same people together, and they enjoy it. And a part of it is because they get to connect with one another. Creating that welcoming space and that welcoming environment. So again, make it comfortable. You know, if I know of somebody that I'm going to be meeting with and they don't like loud noises, I might not take them to that coffee shop because that espresso grinder is going to drive them bananas. Maybe they are somebody that wants to go on that quiet walk around the lake that I mentioned earlier. So making sure that you're creating that environment that works for them. For me, because I work with a lot of moms and families, there's a lot of children that is often involved in my workspace. I have a tote of toys in the back of my car at all times because you never know when that's going to come up, and I want to make sure that the kids feel comfortable, the parent or the family member feels comfortable, and we can go forward that way. Even looking at things like accessibility into a building. You know, we're in a library today, and although not all of our libraries in New Hampshire are accessible, this one is. And knowing who's going to be coming in and making sure that you're creating a space that they can actually get into. That's a whole other piece. Having a hybrid option tonight is another great way to create that welcoming space so people can feel like they can show up. And uplifting those strengths. So it's funny because one of my teammates who was helping me put these slides together, I wrote writer, speaker, and I actually put that friend who's not afraid to handcuff themselves to a pillar at the State House, all right? And she took that and said bold action takers, which she's not wrong, but it's probably much shorter, it looks a lot prettier, but really it takes everybody. You want to have that person that's willing to throw themselves out there, all right, in that way, but you also need to have those writers, you need to have those support people, the childcare folks, the folks that are giving the transportation, all of those things. And there's a role for everyone, and just find what works for them. What do they want to do? What makes them feel comfortable? Because people show up to do the things that they want to do when they know how to do it and they understand how to do it, they feel more comfortable to show up that way. And then again, removing those barriers and understanding that, you know, volunteers are always humans first. Again, that transactional piece of it. A human is not a number. A human is not a single story. A human is not an issue. All right. At the end of the day, we're all humans, so we need to treat each other that way. So meet them where they're at, treat each other the way that you want to be treated situation. Next slide. All right. So this is fun. I have not actually presented on this yet, but it's something that I've been talking about for a long time, which is the joy versus fear messaging. And the reason why I said the evolution of community organizing is because historically, you know, fear had been used as, you know, a way to be able to motivate people to show up and do things. There's that scare factor. And we're finding now, because honestly, I feel like we've been thrown with so many fear-based messaging and scary things that, you know, it almost makes us not want to get involved at all. It makes us not want to watch the news because the news is often scary. It's that they're trying to put fear inside of you. And then you just want to disengage. But there has actually been science that has proven that joy-based messaging is ultimately the way that you want to move. And if you want folks to continue along the ride with you, having that joy is also going to spark them to want to continue with you. I would say, have you ever been to a party, all right, that was just absolutely miserable? All right, they didn't have the right food, people were saying things that you didn't agree with. Are you going to be likely to go back to that? Or are you going to feel more comfortable going over to, say, a party that maybe it's a group of folks getting coffee together at a kitchen table, all right? There are scones and bagels from the bakery down the street, all right, and you're able to have that intimate conversation and you connected with somebody. All right, joy. Joy is what brings people back in. You're not going to go back to that party that's scary and honestly boring, or you don't want to waste your time there. And people's time is incredibly valuable right now. So when we're thinking about fear-based, the mechanism focuses on what might be lost. We see this a lot in political language too, right? Especially in the mailers and things that we see when we get closer to November. While joy emphasizes those potential positive outcomes. You're not ignoring the problems and the issues, but what you're doing is you're creating hope to be able to move forward. Like I said, psychologically, fear has been known to activate that brain's threat detection system. And with joy, it promotes openness, creativity, connection, encouraging long-term engagement and community building. So when you're scared, you know, we hear about fight, flight, freeze, you hear all of those different pieces, but those are all ways to kind of separate yourself. It's more division. While with the joy, it brings folks together. The effectiveness of it, so this is something that I kind of go back and forth with people on. So fear-based messaging, you do get immediate attention. People are seeing it, you know, everyone is about to lose their health care. You're all going to be sick, right? That messaging is going to immediately turn your head and go, what do you mean? What do you mean I'm not going to be able to do that? And you immediately go into that fear-based mode. And if all you hear is that you're going to lose that, and that fear is all you hear, you're probably more likely to sign a petition. But are you more likely to show up because you see that hope in being able to get that back? Or you see that hope in being able to defend it? So that's one of the things that I see with the joy. And then the downside of fear-based is, you know, it can lead to that emotional exhaustion, anxiety. It can paralyze action. Remember, fight, flight, freeze, right? And it can cause people to disengage. They don't want to go to your party anymore. And with the joy, it's going to generate the same level of urgency as fear in those short-term scenarios, or it's not going to generate the same level of immediate urgency. So if you're looking to want to have a long-term person to come along for the ride with you, you're more likely to get that through joy than you are through fear. Next slide. So again, I'm not going to read all of these things to you, but there are definitely key differences in being able to move forward with these kinds of things. I feel like right now, because we are in such a honestly confusing and frustrating time with everything that's going on, you know, we're hearing a lot of that fear messaging everywhere we look. And again, people are disengaging. That joy, creating joy, even creating a welcoming space for folks to come into. You might not even be working on an issue. You might just be checking in with folks and creating a place for folks to connect. That is going to get somebody that's going to continue on that with you. Next slide. So the dynamic interaction of the two. Like I mentioned, you don't want to ignore the fearful pieces of it because it's real, it's true, it's happening. All right, so we need to acknowledge that there is truly a threat there, but we don't want to just end with everyone's going to lose their health care. You want to say something along the lines of everybody, where right now they're talking about taking health care away from all people, but we have an opportunity. If we come together, we might be able to overturn this. If we bring folks together, we might be able to make that change. If we find additional revenue in our state, we might be able to fund public education, right? When we're looking at all of those things, if you just say, you know, we have education freedom accounts, open enrollment, all right, and we're taking money away from public schools, and public schools are now just going to become, you know, charter schools, right? That's a real thing, right? That's happening. But then if you turn it around and you say, the people don't actually want this. If you're talking with folks in your community, you're showing up and you're saying the things out loud. You're making sure that people know how their legislator is behaving, how they, like what they are saying, how they are voting, and having those conversations. You might be able to flip a few seats in November to be able to make sure that the next time around we'll be able to move the things that we want to move. Also, the vulnerability of joy. Joy is often felt as the most vulnerable emotion because people don't want to lose it. All right, because joy is what brings hope, and with hope can come change. So a lot of folks are afraid, and we're in a time right now, especially as I mentioned, where sometimes that joy is hard to find. So we need to make sure that we are doing what we can to be able to elevate the joy in the spaces that we can. And then replacing fear. So joy can be developed as a habit or discipline to combat fear, shifting the mind from what ifs to gratitude and intentionality. Because it's true, when you're sitting there and you're fearful of something that might happen, once you bring the joy and the hope in, suddenly, hey, we can do this and we can do it together. Next slide, please.
It hit it. Last time I did twice.
So when you're talking with somebody, you can lead with the threat, as I had mentioned, but then you pivot to the opportunity because you can make sure to have that conversation with somebody new. Like I said, I mentioned education. So we can say, our public tax dollars are going towards private institutions. Eventually, we're only going to have private institutions. You can stop there. That sounds pretty scary, though. I don't know how you guys feel, but I know that scares me. All right. And I could walk away. But if you say, we are streamlining public dollars to go to private schools, they want to make all schools private schools eventually. But if we manage to get out the vote in November, we might see a different tune to that, right? And we have to do it together. If we show up to testify at this hearing together, we might be able to be heard. Might. But just like throwing those kinds of pieces of leading with that threat, but pivoting to that opportunity. And as I mentioned, that joy is vulnerable. And that's kind of the point. People go to fear to protect themselves because they don't want to lose that joy. And when there's only, like I said, so much joy around, it's hard to be able to keep people engaged. It's actually one of the things I love about some of the rallies that we're seeing at the State House. Some of those signs, all right, snarky, true, but also brings you a little bit of joy for a couple of reasons. One, because you don't feel alone in how you're feeling. And sometimes in a dark, scary situation, you kind of have to make light of what's going on to be able to, again, keep moving. And just like with the one-to-ones and your elevator pitches, joy is a practice. So shifting from the what if it all goes wrong to gratitude and intention, it's a skill that can be built and taught, but it takes time to get there. I often say that sometimes the issues that directly face people is almost like a grieving period. When you get bad news about something, everyone reacts a little bit differently, and grief is weird, and it has all these different pieces. They can get angry about things. They can they can ignore it and act like it's not happening. Sometimes folks just need that time to be able to go through. So joy is a practice. Not everyone's going to be able to jump to joy right away. So you might have to give a little bit of grace and a little bit of space to be able to get them there. Next slide. Fear does move people, but joy is the one that builds those movements. I mentioned that fear is short term. You're going to get that person to sign that petition. It's very transactional. But when you have the joy, people want to keep coming back to your party. People want to keep showing up. And it builds self-sustaining movements, because when you're creating those joyful spaces with the community members that you brought together and introduced to each other, again, they're off doing their own thing, or they're off wanting to take it all to the next level. You've seen in groups where there's been folks that are taking it and running 500 miles an hour with it. They're creating websites, they're trying to create Zoom calls and bringing all these people together. So it's an amazing thing when you start to see that. But the fear is short-term, joy is what keeps them coming back. That's the relational versus the transactional. And that's also why you see more of that fear-forward messaging in some of the documents, like I said, leading up to elections. It's fear. Why? They only want one thing. They only want you to vote a certain way. They're not there actually learning about you. They're not there really thinking about what are the things that truly impacts you as an individual. They want you to vote a certain way. While if you create a space of hope, which we don't really see that many of those messengers out there, but we do sometimes, you often hear them say, we're going to do this together. We can have this come together. We can have change happen together. And that's that joy piece that's being added to that fear. So, as I mentioned, you can't ignore the fear because it's there and it's real and we can't pretend it's not. So one of the things that is really important is when you're thinking about fear and you're wanting to talk about things that are happening, you actually want to make sure that that threat is real. We do know that media, we do know that certain places twist things or they don't give you the full story of what's going on. I'll give you an example. And this one was really difficult for me to do with my team, but month or so ago, we saw the chair of an education committee, Representative Noble, who had said that she was in favor of segregated schools, right, in a Signal chat, right? She said segregated schools. Immediately, the first thing that you saw was she is racist. She wants to separate, folks that are a part of marginalized communities, all of those pieces. When you read it, and it actually, honestly, she wasn't pointing to that. It did look like she was saying that she just wanted Republican schools and Democrat schools, all right? None of it's okay, all right? But the fact that that messaging was taken and thrown out there all over the place when no one actually took the time to really look at what was said and think about it from a different context. That was one of the reasons why, like, my organization, we did not put forward any of that messaging. We did say that she wanted segregated schools, but we did not focus it on the racial side of things that you were seeing that was coming from other places. So avoid that exaggeration, because sometimes it really is just that. It is an exaggeration. And people are sensitive right now. Why? Because they are fearful. So a lot of times people will jump to those conclusions. Including solutions. So like I said, when we were talking about the public schools one, where I said they want to funnel our taxes to private schools, and they want to dismantle public education. But if you give them steps for action that seem achievable, if you run for your school board, or you attend a school board meeting and you go to a hearing, public input sessions, any of those things, those are ways that you can give a simple step for action. Or someone can't show up, will you write a letter? Can you just share how you feel about this? And then finding the spot that's gonna work for them. Again, meeting them where they're at. And empower, don't scare. Focus on how that community can work together to prevent a threat rather than merely inducing fear of the consequence. Because again, we're in scary times. So we need to make sure that we are creating that joy. So from there, I think this is one of the last pieces that I wanted to cover with you all, and it's more along the lines of how to protect yourself too. So knowing your relationships, you're going out and you're meeting with some new folks. new members of your community, coworkers, all the different things. And you also need to protect yourself. You don't want to necessarily throw out too much information. You don't want to invite all of these people that you might have just met into your home. You know, I think about who would you invite to your wedding? Who would you invite to your birthday party? Thinking about that and making sure that there is some kind of a line there, because you do need to protect yourself. And we all need to work together. And sometimes you're in a group with folks that you might not get along with, all right? In the long run, you might not. But there's a skill set, there is a common self-interest piece that you find that make you want to work together. But you need to make sure that you're protecting yourself a little bit there too. So I think about public versus private relationships. Again, temporary accountability for public relationships. You know, a lot of times they are service providers, doctors, community leaders, neighbors, and coworkers. Majority of the families that I work with, they know I live in Sutton, but they don't know where I live in Sutton. Most of them don't even know where Sutton is, let's be real. But that's something that's really important for me, because sometimes when you express vulnerability and you're creating some of these community and comfortable spaces, folks feel as if they can just show up at any given time, all right? And that's not necessarily something that's safe for folks in a lot of different ways. And two, it can get really annoying. So you don't really want to deal with that piece of it too. So acknowledging what is a public relationship and what's a private relationship. You've also heard some folks talk about the public arena. You know, when you're going into the State House, you're being filmed, right? You're sitting there, you're at a hearing, and you're sharing your testimony, and everybody's watching you. It's public information. Anyone can come back to it and find something that you said and potentially twist it and turn it against you. I mentioned the trauma that some folks have experienced working with some organizations that went more that transactional route. And like, again, that trauma that ensues, you say things sometimes that you didn't mean to say, and then it comes back. I've even had one mom who she wrote an LTE to her paper because she was not happy with the way that special education was being handled in her town for her kids. And one of our members of our federal delegation was looking for storytellers. And I was like, oh, well, this is a great person to come in to talk about why we shouldn't dismantle the Department of Education, all right, especially when we're thinking about, free appropriate public education, when we're thinking about IDEA, all of the different pieces, right? This is a great person to come in because those are the things that are under attack. Well, that member of the federal delegation said, no, we don't want her there because they saw her LTE that spoke negatively about public education. And they didn't want that to be twisted to come back onto them. So that mom was not invited to come to that particular storytelling session. She had something compelling to share. She's an amazing storyteller. But because that was out there in the public, nope, we're not letting her in. And again, that's an important story that needs to be heard by our elected officials. Don't worry, I had her write it down, and then I brought her story anyway for them to be able to read. Because I said, despite you not wanting to have her be in the public eye with you speaking with her, you need to know what her experience is like and handing it off. Those private relationships, they are voluntary, they're intimate, they're lasting. They're immediate family and close friends. So even though I have a large group of members that don't know where I live, I have created some amazing relationships and friendships with some folks, and they do know where I live. One of them, actually just yesterday, because it was my son's birthday, and she knows that 14 years ago yesterday, I became a mom. And so she dropped off flowers. So I came home after being in Concord, because there was a hearing yesterday I had to go to, only to find a bouquet of flowers waiting for me. That lifted me up, right? But she knows where I live. That's a close friend of mine. And like I said, and there are other people that, yes, we do work together. Yes, I like this person, but there's somebody that I would want to make sure that I cleaned my house before they walked in. But really, that's one of the ways that I gauge, is this a private relationship or is this a public relationship? How does my gut feel? Do I want them to come over? And am I okay with them seeing that I didn't vacuum yet? Are they okay with knowing that, we have a pile of laundry that needs to be folded in the basket? Or is this somebody that I'm panicking and going, oh, they're gonna think I'm a slob and all these different pieces? So that's one of the ways that I often will look at the difference between public and private, and really understanding how that all works is crucial to be able to make sure that you stay safe too. And then this is I believe this is our wrap up for the most part. So putting all of this into practice, I know it's a lot. These slides are available. I did send them over. So Open Democracy can definitely send them out to folks if you are interested in them. But putting it all into practice. Be authentic, because again, people can smell when you're being transactional. They can smell when you're being fake. All right. I would credit every single one of you for knowing when somebody is trying to pull a blanket over your head, right? Patience and grace are key. Not only when you're having those one-to-ones and it might take somebody longer to process, but understanding that life does happen sometimes. So people might come out and have to leave for a little while, but they might come back in later. So being patient to be able to meet them where they are at. And that patience and grace isn't just for your volunteers, it's also for you. Because change does not happen overnight. I often think of something that I heard at a conference a few years ago about how each one of us is just a link in a chain. And it's up to us to make sure that that chain doesn't break. So being a link in that chain, knowing that the end of that chain, which is going to be the end of our campaign, the end of the thing that we want to see in the world, might not actually be in the next link after us, but continuing around that path and giving yourself some patience and grace and knowing that all of the work you're doing, whether or not you feel as though as if you're making a huge difference, it really is making a difference. And being patient with yourself to be able to do that. Never stop doing those one-to-ones because, again, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know, you can't do better. And people experience things, and that might change their self-interest. That might change the barriers. You might be speaking to somebody that was an amazing volunteer for you who got into a car accident, and they now have mobility struggles and they need support. Somebody that might have never even thought about wanting to advocate for accessibility in spaces because they personally had never experienced it, but they went through something and it changed. So that's two things. That's a self-interest piece that changed for them, but it's also a barrier that you're able to identify that now exists that didn't exist before. Keep building those relationships. Honestly, there's no such thing as the top of a building or the top of building a relationship. Relationships can always get stronger. So you want to continue to build those relationships, not only with a variety of people, but even just focusing in on some folks that you really care about. There's that quote about, don't underestimate a small group of people because they could change the world. I know that I'm really messing up that quote, but I know that's something along those lines. That's real. I lean towards quality versus quantity, including in our events and rallies and things like that. Because you might be able to get 500, 1,000 people to show up to a rally, but how many of them are going to be able to show up or are going to take the time to show up for you when you need them at a hearing, or when you need them to really be there to hold the sign to do visibility, when you need them to make the phone calls. They're not always able to do that. So keep on building those relationships is important. Remind them you're in it together, because again, we are in it together, and it's the community that we need. And then this is probably my number one thing, because I talked about joy for quite some time, but don't be afraid to have a little fun, right? Even the presentation, our very first slide when I was talking about who I am, all right? I could have gone in there and taken all the things that my coworkers put in about me and been like, nope, absolutely not. Like, I need to be professional. I need to make sure that these people like see me for that. But no, all right, have a little fun with it. At MomsRising, one of the things that we like to do is we like to create toolkits that are accessible for folks, but we also like to create memes and messages that are just a little bit more fun. To be able to, again, make light of a situation that we know is horrible, but we need to go forward together. It's, again, introducing that fear, but turning it into a little bit of joy. We have a few projects that we work on that, definitely elevate more towards the joy, including how we name some of our things. We're very punny with the stuff that we like to do. One of the new ones that actually is going on, just started about 10 minutes ago. We have a weekly WTF, all right? A place for folks to be able to join. It's a virtual meeting. Anyone can join, and they can talk about all of the things that we are saying WTF to, all right? It's creating a space to be able to have a little fun while still addressing some of the things that we really do care about. So with that, MomsRising, we would love for folks to stay connected. I mentioned resources that we have, toolkits and things like that to make it accessible. The resources on this one, we have a legislative toolkit where we have things that break it down all the way to where do you park. There's even, there are even links that you could click on your phone and it'll automatically take you to Google Maps. It'll automatically give you the directions on how to get somewhere. As well as giving you advice as to how do you prepare testimony for a hearing. I believe there's a pink card in there, like an example for you to be able to see on how you fill that out to be able to go in there, and things that you should be expecting. We also had an education toolkit. I am on my school board, so I might have wanted to do that for more personal interest than it was for work, but hey, it all works together. And that one was more geared towards school deliberative sessions, because we were talking about, a variety of different things, warrant articles. What is a warrant article? How do they work? What is a school board? What does a school board actually do? Because a lot of folks don't realize that one either. And really breaking things down for people to feel more comfortable to go to and participate in those things. One of the reasons why I wanted to make sure that we included some of our resources in there was also so that you can take it back to some of the volunteers and some of the people that you might be working with. It might make your life a heck of a lot easier than trying to tell them you need to turn left at the Golden Dome. And you need to, these are the only, you can't find street parking, anything like that. Where can you park for longer than a couple of hours? All of those kinds of things. Sometimes it's nice to be able to have those at your fingertips. It's also an interactive, all of our toolkits are interactive toolkits, which means the table of contents is clickable. So you click on the thing that you want to learn about and it'll bring you to the page. For the education toolkit, we also included, open enrollment was on there, EFAs were on there, breaking down cost per pupil and why that's not a good way to do things. Proficiency scores, all of the different talking points that you're hearing from folks. We wanted to make sure to help break it down and give people tangible talking points to be able to learn off of it. Because again, you feel comfortable advocating for things that you know and that you feel comfortable talking about. But yeah, and then the rest of it is just other things. We do have a Facebook page. We have, well, technically not a page, it's a group. We have a Facebook group, and the reason why it's a group and not a page is because we do keep it private. We want it to be a safe space for folks to be able to engage. And we may or may not have participated in some projects that would anger folks on the other side of the aisle on things that we work on. So they might want to try to break into our spaces to be able to basically tear us down, all of those pieces. So it's a way to keep us safe. It's a way to keep our members safe. So when folks join that page, they know that this is an okay place to be. But yeah, and that's it. And it looks like I have some time for questions if anyone has any. I'm done talking.
excellent presentation. Yes, questions for Nancy, and for our Zoom folks, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand and come right off mute and ask it. Any questions in the room first? Yeah.
I know I should know this, but maybe there's someone else in the room who's not familiar. What was in the Momnibus, and what do you want what's in Momnibus 2?
So we were able to extend Medicaid coverage for moms that are on Medicaid 12 years postpartum. 12 months postpartum, sorry. When 12 years.
I know, that'd be awesome.
Wishful thinking, right? That was one thing. We were also able to get some employment protections there, including in Momnibus 2.0, where the big ones was to have job protection for family members to take their child to a child wellness visit. Because we know that that's something that often gets pushed off because you can only go during certain hours and things like that. We also were looking at, we also expanded some funding to family resource centers. Also looking at home visiting because if you're a new mom, I know that personally because I had a preemie, I had home visiting that came in, and thank God they did, because I don't think I would have known what I was doing, even if he wasn't a preemie. But creating spaces like that. There was also a peer support group that I think actually ended up getting taken out, but that was another thing that we were looking for to be able to put into play as well. So those are some of the things that we covered in the maternal health work. And we know that there's still lots more to do, but it was absolutely heartening to be able to see something actually move forward. And that one was an interesting one too. Another reason why I said, public versus private, trying to keep yourself somewhat protected. It doesn't mean you can't work with somebody that disagrees with you on a lot of things, which that's exactly what happened. My senator, him and I don't agree on a lot, all right? But I called him up and I said, hey, I need you to support maternal health. I need you to support Momnibus. I need you to support child care legislation. And he happened to not only vote in favor of it, but he also convinced the other members of his party to also vote in favor of it. And so we ended up having wins because of that. So again, another reason why that public versus private, and another example as to when some of those things came about.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So when you're making an ask, you said just make an ask, but should you have like one or two asks in your pocket? So if they can't do one thing, you can ask them to do, not available Tuesday to testify on the bill. They could sign in on it or do other things.
Yeah.
And then also, is there tips and tricks about like how to make a good ask? Like if you're sort of like you said for one-on-ones, like as far as like if you build common ground and say that we've been successful and that you're part of something that other people are doing, so they don't feel like the whole burden of the project is on themselves. Are those better ways to enhance the getting to a yes when you're making an ask?
Yeah, because it's all about meeting them where they're at, right? Mm-hmm. That was one of the big things that we talked about, identifying strengths, identifying barriers and things like that too. You might not know what they're able to do. You might not know if they have a transportation challenge, so they can't show up on Tuesday for that hearing, just like what Olivia said, but they do have access to be able to sign in online. So yeah, having something in your back pocket. My favorite one was, hey, do you want to go get coffee? And then the response is, I don't drink coffee. Okay, you can get tea, you can get something else, you know what I mean? Or I can't eat there, I can't go into that establishment because of allergies and things like that too. But as I mentioned before, there's also there's something for everybody to do, whether it be, like I said, being that person in the front or being somebody that's working behind the scenes. So being able to offer multiple options for them would absolutely get them more engaged. And it shows that you care. And again, that human piece that I mentioned is really important. So showing them that they care, they're more likely to show up for you.
Post office on the left.
Are there questions? Elizabeth.
Hey Nancy, have you written a bill? And if so, how did you start drafting it with other people in MomsRising?
So personally, I have not written a bill. I have been able to help inspire legislation, I guess, so to speak. So the way that we went about doing that is honestly, finding a legislator, typically your own is the best way to go if you have an amicable one. But to reach out to somebody that you know, then sharing your story and having them help to draft some of that, some of the bill language with you, because they're not going to write the bill. They're going to give an idea. They're going to give provisions that they want within a bill. But then all that's going to get handed off to a legislative service person, someone that's going to write and put it into legalese language. So that's been the way that we've been doing it. Actually, we started our conversations about 3 weeks ago now for 2027 legislation. So we're already talking with obviously our partner groups to figure out what does the right piece. I talk about Swiss cheese hole legislation, the ones that aren't like truly encompassing for everybody. But having our partners come together to identify what does a perfect bill look like, bringing in a legislator who has potentially a common self-interest. I can think of that with some of the childcare legislation because a lot of the folks that tend to sponsor that happen to also have a childcare story themselves. So that's a self-interest piece again, bringing in that legislator and then basically trying to figure out what can work, asking them what they think might pass and what won't, all of those kinds of pieces. So that's the way that we've always done it. But if there's a certain piece of legislation or if there's an issue that you're looking for, like definitely reach out to Pens and I, and then we can chat about it and see if there's an avenue to take with it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I have just one, if I can find it. I just have one more thing that I wanted to just say, because I know that I focus a little bit on that public life versus private life situation. And, you know, we're building our power within our public lives, right? Through the powerful relationships that we're developing. We have to remember to include a variety of different voices because we have to remember that oppression is a systematic process to strip away a person's public life. When we're thinking about voting rights, all right? We are singling out women, particularly right now, right? And immigrant communities as well, all right? That is oppression. And it's interfering with their ability to be able to take part and really have a voice in that public arena, in that public space. So when you're thinking about the folks that you want to bring in, again, variety of skill set, the folks that you want to have your one-to-ones with, always remember to be open to the possibility of a variety of different people, because at the end of the day, oppression is real and it really does strip away folks' ability to be able to engage. So that's all I've got.
I have a question. So do you ever come up against Moms for Liberty?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, not so much in New Hampshire, to be honest with you. I want to say probably because like one of their head people is a representative in the State House right now. But in other parts of the country, especially, MomsRising may or may not have paid for a mobile billboard to go around Philadelphia because that was where they were having their their huge conference. Was all happening in Philadelphia. So we ended up getting a billboard basically saying this is not what moms actually want, and amplifying it that way. But we haven't really hit too much of them here in New Hampshire yet. I know that they exist, but their power is nowhere near what it is in other spaces. And I actually said to somebody that I know that leans more towards Moms for Liberty, I had said to them, I was like, so I'm like just curious, you know, there are some things that we do actually agree on. Would you be willing to sit down and have a conversation about maybe partnering on something? I also did this with the EFA person, I call her the voucher lady, but I did this with her as well, where I said to her, you know, adequacy funding for education. I'm like, hey, you know, we both want them to go from that 4,000 to that 7,000 mark that was in the Conval ruling. So you would benefit from it too, just as much as all of the other, you know, public school advocates would as well. And I'm like, is that something that maybe we can go and testify on together? Because boy, would those heads spin in a hearing if they saw both of those sides coming in and speaking out against the same thing or in favor of the same thing.
And were they interested?
She said that she'd be willing to write a letter because she doesn't do direct advocacy. And I was like, yes, you do. That's how you got all your funding. But just because you do it behind closed doors doesn't mean you don't do it. But she said that she'd be willing to have a conversation with me about it, but I didn't go anywhere. But that's an example that I have similarly with Moms for Liberty and things like that. When I think about it, is I don't look at, there's no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. We can agree on some things, we can disagree on others, and sometimes it's going in together on one thing, and then after we get that thing that we both wanted done, then we go our separate ways and we go back to fighting against each other. But finding all of that, so yeah. And I'm also a part of it's like an anti-Moms for Liberty New England group personally, just because I want to track where they are and what they're doing.
Do people get you confused?
No, I haven't had any issues with that. I've had folks more likely to confuse us with Moms Demand Action, which, you know, honestly, if they want to compare us to Moms Demand Action, I will take that any day of the week because that's an amazing group of folks to be compared to as well. But we also partner with them on things too. But that's really the only one that I've found that we've gotten mixed up with so far. And I'm knocking on wood here because, you know, as we see free state movement and things like that, you never know when there might be a Moms for Liberty rush that comes into the state. But when they do, I've been organizing, I've got my people, we're ready for them.
Well, thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think Ellis in the chat complimented your slides, so.
Oh, yes. Ellis Robinson says, thanks and kudos to the designer.
Thanks.
Well, thank you all. We'll see you all next week for our final series.
Yes. Tune in next week, same time, and thanks to all our Zoom audience. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, Nancy.